Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating, highly specific document from 2014. It's called A Letter to Earth Citizens by Xu Feng. And, what makes this manifesto such a masterclass in utopian logic is how it starts with everyday relatable environmental concerns and then, bam, it abruptly pivots into a demand for total, radical societal deconstruction. Let's trace exactly how it builds this case. So we're going to jump right into the deep end here with a remarkably intense quote from later in the text. Traditional marriage and family is no doubt the source of humanity's miseries and all kinds of conflicts. I mean, wow, right? That is a profound and incredibly extreme statement. But how does the author actually reach this radical conclusion? Well, it starts with a premise that, honestly, most people today would probably agree with. The letter kicks off with a very unifying global diagnosis. It basically asks us to see the Earth simply as a small village in a vast universe, and all human beings as children of the greatest creator. If you think about our modern pushes for globalization, this really takes it a step further. The author's core idea is that only by coming together as singular villagers can we actually keep the Earth's ecological balance intact. To really drive this urgency home, Xu Feng leans on an evocative old proverb: "No eggs can remain unbroken when the nest is upset." It's a stark, universally understandable warning, isn't it? If our earthly nest is ruined by ecological collapse, absolutely no one escapes the consequences. But right about here is where the text shifts from just pointing out environmental problems to actually pointing fingers at the culprits. The manifesto argues that humanity is stubbornly ignoring nature's warning signs, all just to protect our personal interests and outmoded lifestyles. The core argument being laid out is that if we want to survive, our very way of living has got to fundamentally change. Which naturally leads us to the pivotal question of the entire manifesto, the real hinge for the whole document. What is the true root of these global crises? Rather than pointing to standard metrics, things like carbon emissions or resource scarcity, the author abruptly shifts the diagnosis entirely away from the physical world and towards something completely spiritual. Enter the soul crisis. The text defines this crisis not just as a symptom, but as the absolute core of all global issues. According to the manifesto, superficial stopgap measures like recycling or passing new policies are basically useless. The idea is that the physical condition of the world is entirely dependent on an internal condition, and that condition requires absolute soul purification before anything else can actually be fixed. Now, this brings us to a really fascinating shift in how the author views crime in society as a whole. Normally, you might expect personal or psychological issues to be the main driver of massive crimes, but the author completely flips this on its head, arguing that an undesirable survival environment is the true root of conflict. Because crimes are the product of this toxic environment, the author insists that society itself has to be completely overhauled to fix human behavior. So how do we fix this toxic environment? Well, the text doesn't just offer philosophy. It introduces a radical, ready-to-deploy rebuild called the Second Home, which is now known as the new oasis for life, established by the group Lifechanyuan, and they claim to already possess the successful practical experience to make this work. It's an active, urgent call to global citizens to abandon traditional structures and put this exact system into practice. Essentially, the text presents a super rigid binary choice. On one hand, you have traditional society, which is painted as inherently destructive and driven by private interest and outmoded systems. On the other hand, the new oasis for life promises an ultimate solution through soul purification and a unified international big family. There is absolutely no middle ground here. It's either the old, destructive way or the new, highly organized way. So what does this new, unified way actually require from us? Well, an unprecedented, total dissolution of global boundaries. This international big family demands the complete merging of all nationalities, all religions, and all political parties. Everyone has to merge into one essential family, with no difference of nations. We're talking about an absolute leveling of every single demographic, political, and ideological line that currently divides humanity. Which brings us right back to that shocking quote from the very beginning of The Explainer. Following the logic that traditional society is a toxic environment, the author explicitly demands that traditional marriage and family must be completely destroyed. Let that sink in. The nuclear family is framed not as the building block of society, but as its fatal flaw, one that will inevitably lead to humanity's total destruction if it's left unchecked. Having laid out both the diagnosis and this incredibly radical solution, the ultimate utopian end state they're aiming for is actually quite simple. One world, one family. It's a vision where every single life is universally respected, cared for, and treated as precious. To achieve this massive societal leap, the author provides a really strict sequential roadmap. Step 1, it starts internally with purifying souls. Step 2, that purification allows us to alter our traditional survival and production environments. From there, Step 3, society takes the radical leap of completely replacing traditional marriage. And finally, Step 4, all of this culminates in the establishment of the international big family. It is a sweeping blueprint, going from individual spiritual cleansing all the way up to total global deconstruction. But a structural vision this grand requires absolute authority to implement, right? So, in a rather bold move, the author directly petitions the United Nations and global governments to basically just give the green light to this international family. The text is urging world leaders to step aside, to not interfere for political reasons, and to stop clinging to outmoded systems just to safeguard their own power. After addressing world leaders, the manifesto then turns its focus directly to you, the individual reader, with one final plea. It says, if each one can sacrifice a small part of their private interest, the world will get out of its crises. So the core mechanism to unlock this utopia isn't just government compliance. No, it requires the willing sacrifice of your personal, private interests, your habits, and even your ideology, all for the overarching well-being of the collective. Now, if everyone actually makes this profound sacrifice, the promised payoff is immense. We're talking joy, happiness, freedom, and harmony for all nations, safely blessed by Mother Nature. It's a promise of a true utopia, completely free of conflict and disaster. But, and this is a big but, the text insists this paradise is strictly locked behind adopting this extreme, highly specific new paradigm. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the central tension of this text. Is the promise of a perfect, unified utopia worth the absolute sacrifice of your private interests, individual liberties, and traditional relationships? It's a genuinely fascinating look at how utopian visions diagnose our world and the incredibly steep price they demand for paradise. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the structures around you.